Wait. Before you scroll away, let me ask you something. What would you do if a powerful millionaire CEO suddenly stood in front of you, declaring feelings you never believed possible? That's exactly what happened in this story, and trust me, you won't want to miss the shocking moment at the end. If you're curious already, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel right now, because this story will keep your heart racing and your emotions stirred until the very last line. Now let's dive in. No one ever looked twice at Daniel. He was 32, a single father, and worked 2 exhausting shifts just to make sure his 6-year-old daughter Lily had food in her stomach and shoes that weren't falling apart. Life had not been kind. After his wife passed away unexpectedly, Daniel carried the world on his shoulders with no one to lean on. His clothes were often simple, worn jeans and a faded jacket, and though his face still held a quiet strength, most people only saw the tired man struggling to survive. Every morning began the same, racing from his night shift at the factory to walking Lily to school, clutching her tiny hand and hiding his fatigue behind a soft smile. She was his whole world, his reason to keep breathing when life felt too heavy. Across town, in a world far removed from Daniel's struggles, lived Alexander Hayes, the young, brilliant, and famously aloof CEO of one of the nation's top companies. At just 35, Alexander was not only a millionaire but also the subject of endless news stories and magazine covers. Women chased him, businessmen envied him, and yet he remained untouched by it all, focused only on building his empire. His life was sleek, polished, and perfect, or at least that's how it appeared to everyone watching from the outside. But Alexander carried his own loneliness, an emptiness that all his wealth and success could never fill. He had grown tired of fake smiles, shallow relationships, and the hollow sound of people praising his money instead of his heart. What Alexander craved was something real. Fate brought their 2 worlds crashing together on a cold evening. Daniel had finished a brutal double shift and was waiting at the bus stop with Lily, his arms wrapped around her to keep her warm in the biting wind. Alexander's luxury car slowed near the stoplight, and for a reason he couldn't explain, his eyes caught the sight of Daniel. Something about the man, his tired posture yet protective embrace of his daughter, struck Alexander harder than anything had in years. There was honesty in the way Daniel's eyes softened when Lily leaned against him, an honesty Alexander had never seen in all his glittering circles. The moment passed quickly, the light turned green, and the car drove away, but Alexander's mind did not. That image haunted him through the night. The next day, as fate would have it again, Daniel arrived at a downtown cafe where he sometimes cleaned tables for extra money. To his shock, the cafe buzzed louder than usual because Alexander Hayes himself was there, seated in the corner with his sleek black suit and coldly handsome face. The millionaire CEO, the untouchable figure on billboards, was suddenly only feet away. Daniel kept his head down, embarrassed of his apron and worn shoes, praying no one would notice how small he looked beside such a powerful man. But notice he did. Alexander's eyes followed him every time he moved, and finally, when Daniel passed his table, Alexander spoke. "Excuse me," his voice was low, commanding, yet strangely gentle, "could I have a word with you?" Daniel froze, confused. He had no idea why a man like Alexander would want to talk to him, but he walked over cautiously. "Yes, sir. Do you need something?" Alexander studied him for a long moment before answering. "Your daughter, Lily, right? I saw you with her yesterday. You looked different. Real. Not like the people I usually meet." Daniel's cheeks flushed, a mix of pride and defensiveness rising inside him. "She's my life," he said firmly, not caring if he sounded blunt. "Everything I do is for her." For a moment, Alexander said nothing, then a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "I admire that. And forgive me if this sounds sudden, but I'd like to know you better." Daniel laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Please don't joke with me," he muttered, his voice heavy with disbelief. "People like you don't even see people like me. I'm just a poor man trying to survive." But Alexander didn't laugh. His gaze grew sharper, his tone more serious. Do I look like I'm joking? I've had enough of people chasing my money. I'm not interested in wealth or appearances. I want someone genuine, someone like you. Daniel's heart pounded, torn between suspicion and a strange flicker of hope. Why him? What could a millionaire CEO possibly want from a struggling single dad? Before he could ask, Lily's laughter rang out from the other side of the cafe where she was coloring on napkins, and Alexander's eyes softened again at the sound. From that moment, Alexander began to appear more often, outside the cafe, near the school, even at the small park where Daniel took Lily to play. At first, Daniel resisted, convinced this was some cruel prank, but Alexander's persistence wore down his walls. He wasn't showing off his wealth or trying to impress, he was simply there, carrying Lily on the swings, listening to Daniel's stories, even helping fix a broken door at their tiny apartment. Slowly, painfully, Daniel realized Alexander wasn't joking, he was sincere. And that sincerity scared Daniel more than anything else. For years, he had built his heart into armor, protecting Lily and himself from disappointment, but now a powerful man was asking to break through. As whispers spread in the neighborhood about the millionaire who kept visiting a poor single dad, Daniel felt pressure from all sides. Some mocked him, saying Alexander would grow bored and leave. Others grew jealous, trying to pry into their lives. But through it all, Alexander remained steady, his eyes always on Daniel, his voice always calm. I don't care what people think, Alexander said one night as they stood under the city lights, Lily asleep in Daniel's arms. I only care about what you feel. Daniel's throat tightened. No one had ever asked him that before. And that was the beginning of a storm that neither of them could escape. If you're still here, you've already felt the pull of this story, and I promise it only gets more intense from here. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel now so you never miss stories like this, because the ending of Daniel and Alexander's journey will leave you breathless. Despite Alexander's persistence, Daniel's doubts grew heavier. He couldn't shake the thought that this was temporary, that one day the CEO would wake up and remember who he really was, a man of power, surrounded by luxury, untouchable by the dirt and struggle of ordinary life. You'll leave, Daniel said one evening, his voice harsh though his eyes betrayed fear. You'll get tired of me and my broken life. Please don't joke with me, Alexander. Don't promise things you can't keep. But Alexander stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. Daniel, I've never been more serious about anything in my life. You think I see you as broken, but all I see is strength. You raised a child alone. You survived when everything was against you. That is more powerful than any business empire I've ever built. Daniel wanted to believe him. He really did. But he carried scars too deep to erase with words. And so he tested Alexander, sometimes without meaning to. When Lily fell ill and Daniel had no money for the hospital, he refused to ask for help, afraid Alexander would think he was after his wealth. But Alexander found out anyway. He appeared at the hospital, not with flashy gestures, but quietly, sitting beside Lily's bed, holding her hand until she smiled again. He didn't boast or remind Daniel of what he had done, he simply stayed, proving that his presence was not conditional. And that night, watching the millionaire CEO asleep in a chair beside his daughter's bed, Daniel's heart began to shift. Still, the world wasn't kind. News spread quickly that Alexander Hayes, the untouchable CEO, was spending his time with a poor single father. The media ridiculed him, tabloids splashed photos of Daniel's shabby apartment, strangers hurled insults. He's just using you for publicity, one neighbor sneered. Men like that don't settle for men like you. Daniel's old fears surged, and he almost pushed Alexander away for good. But when he confronted him, Alexander's answer was fierce. Do you think I'd risk everything I've built if I wasn't serious? Let them talk, Daniel. I don't want a perfect image. I want a real life, with you. the turning point came at an unexpected moment. Alexander invited Daniel and Lily to a company event, a glamorous gathering filled with glittering chandeliers, expensive gowns, and watchful eyes. Daniel felt painfully out of place in his borrowed suit, clutching Lily's hand like a lifeline. Whispers followed them as they entered, and he wished desperately to turn back. But then Alexander stood on the stage, microphone in hand, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Daniel. "Tonight," he said clearly, "I want to acknowledge the most important person in my life. Not a shareholder, not a business partner, but him." Gasps rippled through the hall as Alexander pointed directly to Daniel. "Daniel, the man who taught me what strength, love, and honesty truly mean. And I don't care if the world laughs or judges, because I won't let go of him." The hall erupted, some in shock, some in applause, but all Daniel could hear was the pounding of his own heart. Tears blurred his vision as Lily clapped her little hands proudly beside him. In that moment, every wall he had built crumbled. Alexander wasn't joking. He wasn't pretending. He was fighting for him before the whole world. Later that night, away from the glittering crowd, Daniel whispered the words he had been afraid to say. Maybe I believe you now." Alexander smiled, a rare softness in his eyes, and took his hand. "Then don't let go." From that day on, their lives changed. It wasn't easy, there were still whispers, still judgment, but together they faced it. Daniel learned to trust, and Alexander learned to love beyond wealth. And little Lily, the heart that connected them both, grew up watching a love story that proved money, power, and status meant nothing compared to sincerity and courage. So when you think love is impossible, when you think your life is too broken to be noticed, remember this story. Because sometimes, even the poorest heart can be the treasure a millionaire searches for. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because more stories like this are waiting for you.